everyone, it's Stephanie from Little Cookie Co. I'm so excited to show you guys this Halloween cookie video. It's so adorable and so easy to do, so I hope you join me in making these and let me know what you think. Okay, so first thing we need to do is cut our tipless bag. So the seam is always in the middle of the bag. I like to squish my tip together, make sure there's no icing in there so you get a nice clean cut. And I always like to test a couple of lines to see how thick my line is. So when I refer to thick, I don't mean the icing consistency, I mean the actual, roundness of the icing that's coming out. And if it's a really thin line, that's too thin for my outline. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it again, a slightly bigger cut this time, because I want a thick enough line so that when I flood my cookie, the flood will stay in that line and not, if it's really thin, it'll just kind of go right over the side of the cookie. So we start by touching down our outline consistency here. So this is my thicker icing. This is going to keep all that flood inside. And I go really slowly, take my time. I'm piping with two hands, so I'm holding the bag in my right hand and I have my left finger against the piping bag. The reason I do this is it steadies my hand quite a bit. It's really hard to go slow, put pressure on the bag and have your bag so steady. So always two-handed, it really helps to steady that bag. And then I'm going to go in with my flood. I'm trying to get as close to the edge as possible without not going too much over. And as I'm going over, I'm trying to cover my line there a little bit. Here it's kind of didn't go quite as smooth, so I'm smoothing it out to get going again and get my rhythm back. You can always stop when you're flooding a cookie if you need to, readjust your bag or your hand. You don't have to keep going. You can stop whenever you need to. And then once I'm done here, I'm going to give my cookie a little shake and it'll settle that icing nice and smooth. And we're going to put it aside to dry for a little while. Now that my layer has crusted over, we're going to do Frankenstein's hair. So I have my outline consistency black icing here, and I'm going to do the outline of his hair. We want to use the top third of the cookie. And I like to let my outlines dry for a few minutes before I go ahead and flood. So I'm going to continue on to another step here. So we're going to do his eyebrows, which I'm going to make kind of in one big scar. It's going to be a goofy looking Frankenstein. So I touch down and I lift the bag up and I look at the second point I want to touch down on. So that's what I'm focusing on, going from one point to the other point, not too much worried about what's going on in the middle. When you lift your bag up for a straight line like that, if you lift it up and you're kind of stretching that piping icing line to the second point, it'll fall nice and straight. If you're really close to the cookie, it's hard to get a nice line. Like, you don't want to be touching the cookie and drawing that line across. You want to lift your piping bag and get that line to fall nice and even. And then we're just going to put little lines here touching top to bottom just to make that scar. And then we're going to go in and flood his hair. And like I said, I usually like to let my outlines, so even the outline for the base of the cookie, this outline, I like to leave it for a minute or two. It's thick icing, it dries pretty quick. And I feel like it just holds the shape better. You don't have to wait for it to dry, that's my preference. But I feel like it just holds that icing in nice and well. And I'm going to go in with my scribe here. You make sure it covers all the edges there and pull the icing down towards the tips of the hair. They're really small areas and I can't get in there quite with my piping bag, so that's where the scribe really comes in handy. And then we're going to move on to his eyes. So I'm going to take my outline consistency, my thick icing, and I'm just going to hold it steady above where I want his eye. And my bag is straight up and down. And I'm going to give it a jiggle as I pipe. And that just smooths out the icing at the same time. So that little jiggle of the tip of the bag when I'm piping is just kind of like a scribe going in there. And it just helps to smooth out the thick icing right away. And then I'm just going to finish off by smoothing it off with my scribe as well. And then I'm going to go in with my outline consistency, my thick icing here. And draw a couple of goofy eyes. And if you ever need to smooth anything out with your scribe, you can go ahead and do that. And again, with my thick green icing here, just make a little button nose. And then I'm going to pipe my black line. Again, I lift up, I look at where I want to stop, and that's where I touch down again. And then it gives me a nice straight line. I'm going to let him dry for a minute or so, and when I come back here, I can do the teeth now. And I'm going to try to keep these teeth as square as possible. So whenever I'm filling kind of thick areas like this, very small areas, I keep the bag really, really close. I don't want to lift the bag up. I just kind of want the icing to puddle around the tip. And then I use my scribe to go in and make them a little bit more square and do those finer details. And there we go. We got our goofy looking, great, cute little Frankenstein. Now for our next cookie, we're going to make our pumpkin. So I have my flood icing here. I'm just going to squiggle a bunch of lines on here. I just want to get some icing on here, and I'm going to use a clean paintbrush. This is a paintbrush I only use for cookies. And I'm just going to spread a thin layer of this icing here. This is going to be the back of the eyes and the mouth. So just need a thin layer of icing, and you don't need to go all the way to the edge. I'm going to let this dry just for a minute or two. If you have a fan, it dries a lot quicker. And then we're going to come back and use outline consistency orange here. And you can really draw any face you want. This is the easiest one for me to do. A couple of triangles for the eyes. And then I'm going to do the classic mouth for the pumpkin. You know, the outline of the teeth here. One on the top and two on the bottom. And you can kind of see how he's taking shape soon. And with the same consistency, I'm going to go around the pumpkin here. Again, this is my thick outline consistency. It's going to hold all that flood in. And I like to let these dry for a few seconds. Okay, not a few seconds, maybe a few minutes. Just to make sure that that icing is not moving anywhere when I put my flood on it. And here I'm going to take that same thick consistency, and I'm just doing squiggly lines around the pumpkin face, the eyes, and the mouth. Reason being is these are really small areas in between, you know, the icing where I'm flooding, and it tends to crater. So this is just a little help to keep that icing nice and fluffy and not, you know, crater and make holes and kind of cave in on itself. So you kind of gotta keep an eye on where you're going to flood. Make sure you're flooding on the outside of the pumpkin and in between the correct lines. We don't want to fill in his eyes or his mouth. And I'm taking my time here, going slow into the areas, especially around the eyes and where the mouth. I'm going to take my time and not put too much pressure on the bag. I don't want to fill these areas, these really small areas. I don't want to overfill it with icing, because then it's going to go into the, you know, into the mouth and the eyes where it's not supposed to go. So I'm taking my time, and I'm not putting too much pressure on my bag here. And anytime you need to, you know, bring your scribe in and smooth that icing out, get it all the way into the corners. I can see a little bit of outline around the eyes and the mouth, so I'm trying my best to just pull and push that icing and trying my best to cover it. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you have a few minutes before, you know, the icing starts to dry, so you can play around with your scribe in there. And that's the pumpkin one. It's pretty simple, but it's super cute. I like it. Alright, next one up is our Dracula. So again, I'm going to start with my outline consistency here. Circles are really hard to get perfect. So if you can't get a perfect circle, don't worry, neither can I. I try my best. I've heard a good trick is to look a little bit ahead of where you're piping. So don't look at the tip of the piping bag, but look ahead of where you're going so that you try to get a nice circle. Doesn't work all the time for me, but we make the best of it. I'm going to let my outline dry for a couple minutes, and then I come back with my flood. Notice how I always start my flood a little bit inside of the cookie, and then I go towards the edge, that little, you know, divot there that I have. That is because I don't want to over flood on the edge. So I always start inside my cookie a little bit to see how much pressure I need coming out of that bag, because if it's a really loose flood, you put pressure on it, it's going to just fly out of your bag. So I always do a little test on the inside and then head towards the outside, so I know how much icing and how much pressure I need to put on my bag. Now that this has crusted over, we're going to go in and do the hair. And if you let your cookie dry longer, where you can actually, use an edible marker or scrape your scribe in, you can do, you can scrape the outlines of where you kind of want to go. I'm freehanding this. It's not always perfect, not always centered. But again, you know what? It happens. We're not perfect. We're here for cute cookies and good tasting cookies. So again, I'm going to go in. My outline has dried a little bit, and I'm going to go in that flood. And so here I'm just going to get that icing all the way into the corner. I have a little bit too much in that corner, and I'm scared it's going to drip over the edge, so I kind of pulled it back away from that corner. I try not to put too much pressure, so I put a lot of pressure and then I come to those points and I kind of let go of the pressure on the bag, so I'm not over flooding those areas. The more you practice, the more you learn kind of, how much pressure to put at what point, and you don't want to put too much on the edges that are really small, because that's when I get those little drips over the sides of my cookies. Okay, so I'm just going to add his nose here in the middle before I add his eyes. And again, that's my thick icing. I want it to keep its shape. And it's a little tiny area, so it smooths out pretty quick, even though it's thick icing. And I'm going to add his mouth here just so the line dries while we're working on the eyes. And I'm going to grab my thick icing consistency in white. And again, holding my bag straight up and down, just jiggling it a little bit as I do those eyes so the icing settles. I'm trying to make it kind of a round bubble. And then I go and I have a little peak, when I took the bag away. So I'm just going with my scribe to jiggle it, smooth. And then I go in again, I'm putting the eyes in there and I jiggle just the slightest bit to make it nice and smooth. And anytime you need, you go in with your scribe just to make it. It's hard, you don't see the little details, but there's little peaks there that I smooth out. And now that my mouth has dried for a couple minutes, and then I'm going to go in and make his fangs here after my line has dried a little bit. And I just pipe a little bit of icing and then drag it down to make it to a point. You can also use your scribe to drag it a little bit more pointy if you need to. But I think he looks pretty good. And there's our Dracula. Alright, on to our mummy cookie. I really love this cookie because it reminds me of one of the first cookies I ever made when I started getting into this. And so I'm really excited to make this one. So we're going to put some flood icing here. I just need a little bit of a background where his eyes are going to be. So again, it doesn't have to be the whole cookie, but just enough so we won't see any of the cookie underneath. It just will be black. And I'm going to put my orange outline consistency here, and I'm going to make, again, a little jiggle so the eyes are nice and puffy, but they get smoothed at the same time. I like to use like bright colors for the eyes, like orange or green, and makes them kind of glow in the dark looking. So I think it looks really cool. And then again, going in with my black icing here. This is my outline consistency. I don't want it thick. I don't want it, spreading out like my flood. I want it to keep the shape, keep those sharp eyes looking creepy, I guess. And then I'm going to go in with my white icing. This is my flood here. I want something I can spread easily, and just be careful you don't get too close to the eyes. I just want to fill the rest of the cookie with white icing. And again, using a clean paintbrush, I'm going to try to get right to the edge if I can. You might have to go, back and forth a few times. Don't worry, this is not it. He's not finished yet. We still have another step to go once we get this cookie covered. And be careful you don't smudge too much of the icing into the black. You just want to be gentle around this area because you don't want to make it make the black icing wet again and make it gray. If it does, it's okay. You can cover it with the next step. Don't worry about too much. And now I'm going to take my thick outline icing. We want to make sure it's thick so that it holds those lines. If it's puddling together when you're piping these lines, it means your icing isn't thick enough. And so here you can go in any direction you want. I'm just making lines, from point A to point B. I'm lifting my piping bag up. So touching down, lift up, touch back down on the opposite side of the cookie, and just continue it until you kind of covered the whole area, white area, with lines. You can crisscross some of them. Go in whichever direction you want. And you continue until basically you're happy with it. I want to cover, a little bit around the eyes here that I didn't get to. So you can make as many lines as you want, as little lines as you want. Alright, so now we're going to outline this cookie. This is my thick consistency again. Touch down, slightly hold up your bag and go around the cookie as best as you can. As I come around to the beginning of the cookie again, I slowly lower my bag closer and closer to the cookie until I get to the beginning point to touch my icing back and close the circle up. Okay, so now we're going to go in with my flood icing here, and again, flood around the cookie. Trying to cover as much as my outline as possible without, going too much over and spilling over those edges. When I get to the middle, I can be a little bit more careless. Doesn't have to be in a circle. If you want to do it zigzaggy, whichever way you want to do your flood, go for it. And you can use your scribe or you can shake the cookie, whichever is easier for you. And if you ever need any tips on, how to make icing or, why you have so many bubbles in your icing or craters or a good cookie recipe, I've got it all on my channel if you take a look. And if you don't find your answers, just leave me a comment under the video and I can help you out. So once this crusts over, you can either use a fan to dry to speed up the process. If you're air drying, it takes quite a while. It takes a few hours. But fan or dehydrator work really well to speed up the process, about 20 minutes, half an hour, and I can go ahead and pipe these eyes. So this is my black outline consistency, and I'm just jiggling the bag like we've done before. And then I'm going to slightly less pressure here, and with my bag, I'm going to make 2 little nostrils, really, really small. And then again, touch down, lift up a little bit, and touch back down. That gives me a nice straight line here. And then I'm going to again touch down, lift up over my line, and back down. So always even the slightest lift just to make that icing fall nice. And I'm not going right through that line, I'm going on top of it. And that's it. And we've got our last cookie. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you get a chance to make them for Halloween, please let me know in the comments how it goes. I would love to see them. You can send me or tag me in your photos on Instagram as well. And I hope you have a happy Halloween and you get to bake some lovely cookies. And we'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching and happy baking!